Good evening and welcome to 630 Point of View. I'm Chris Berg. Thanks so much for joining us. Tomorrow night, there's a neighborhood meeting with the Fargo PD. They're going to be taking a look at crime stats in downtown Fargo. And we've got some breaking news for you tonight. The newest details about what was happening as far as crime and calls for service right here in Fargo with Fargo Police Chief David Todd. He joins us in studio. Chief Todd, thank you so much for being here, sir.
Thanks for having me.
We'll talk about tomorrow night in a moment, but you brought some pretty interesting stats to show how things are changing in our city as far as crime and calls for service for 2015. What do you have, sir?
Right, Chris, we were just talking before the show here about our calls for service, and for 2015, we're starting to see a real increase, or we saw a real increase in our calls for service as compared to the year before. Back in 2014, our calls for service were 65,682. And for 2015, we're up to 74,516. So we had a 13% increase in calls for service. So that's a fairly dramatic increase in calls for service. In the last 5 years, we've had a 57% increase in calls for service.
Wow.
So that's a lot of demand for law enforcement services.
So what do you attribute that number, that growth to the most?
Well, that's kind of hard to do without some type of study to do that, but I think the population growth in the city has contributed significantly to that. It could be some demographics that have changed, maybe the culture or attitude towards law enforcement or what's important to people in the community has changed. I'm not sure, but that's a significant demand.
And one of the things I think to make clear too, because I think most people, as you watch the news and social media, feel, hey, crime is up in our community. And just for clarity, and maybe I'm missing this, but calls for service are up. It doesn't necessarily mean that crime is up. Is that accurate, or?
Well, they usually do correspond somewhat. We are seeing an increase in property crime in the city. Personal crime will be close to the same, or maybe just a slight increase. But and personal crime is usually an assault, a simple assault, aggravated assault, homicide, robbery. Those are personal crimes. Property crimes are usually thefts or burglaries, criminal mischief, things like that. And we've seen a significant, well, I don't want to say significant, but an increase in property crimes. And when we're doing our intelligence-led policing meetings, which are every Thursday, we are seeing that a lot of those property crimes are addiction-driven.
Wow.
And so what we have seen is an increase in heroin and meth in our community. And particularly that addiction to heroin can really drive property crimes, because people steal things in order to trade them for drugs or pawn them or sell for drugs.
And I don't want to hold you to any numbers here, because I know that you still have to audit this report, and your final report will come up probably in the next 30 days, I would guess. Or so.
I would think so, yes.
Guesstimation, when you look at 2015 and the numbers come out, you're going to say, hey, personal crime was up 0%, maybe 1%, and property crime up what?
You know, the personal crime will certainly be in the single digits. Property crime could be double digits as far as increases, but we'll have to, like I said, we have to go through those numbers and audit them. But again, I think a lot of that property crime, particularly the thefts and burglaries, are addiction-driven.
Wow, and the 57% increase over 5 years for calls for services, to me, a pretty stunning number, yes?
It is. I mean, if you take that 74,516 number and you divide it out by days and years, I mean, that's 204 calls for service per day, and that's about 9 calls for service per hour. So when you look at the demand on the officers of their response time, their time on scene, their time taking people to jail or filling out paperwork and reports afterwards, that's a significant demand on officers, and it certainly limits their ability to then do preventive work in the forefront to prevent crimes.
Right, and you've got obviously the drug addiction you just talked about with those kind of crimes. So we'll talk about some more officers in a moment. But one thing I want to do quickly is I really want to give a tip of the hat to Chief Todd as well. A while back, you may have watched the show. We asked him about, hey, can you actually break crimes down based on race? You don't have very many specifics today, but you found out that, hey, Chris, it looks like we can do this.
We did. After that show, Chris, I went back the next day and I had talked to my staff before, and they said, well, we're not sure how to do it, but we have this new crime analyst person that's in our department, and I sat down and talked to her about that, and she said, well, I think I can do that. So
nice.
within a matter of that day, she actually was able to generate a report for me on arrests based on race. And so we do have that information available now.
And can I get that from you sometime soon?
I'm sure you can.
Thank you very much. Two more things quickly, as we've got about 2 minutes left. One is, I know you've got 3, I think, new officers starting February 1st. And
Right.
What does that mean for the force? And does that put you at a full force?
Well, no, we're not. We will not be at a full force. Right now, we're at about a dozen positions down, about 12 positions down. And I know of 2 other resignations that are going to take place within the next couple of weeks. So that'll be 14 people down. Well, we are in a market that's very competitive for good police officers. And so we're constantly competing to keep those, to retain those officers and attract them in the first place. We'll hire those 3 people, start them February 1st, this coming Monday. But then I've also got another 6 or 7 experienced officers that we're looking at hiring from other agencies throughout the state. And we got probably another dozen people besides that are interested in working for us.
That's good. But quickly, Chief, and then we got a minute left, but help people understand, I mean, the stressors. I can only imagine what your department's going through, being 14 people short. If you can sort of sum that up quickly, what kind of stressors does that put on your force?
Well, that's a matter of filling beats and caseloads.
Wow.
You know, there are times we're not able to fill every beat, every shift, every day of the week, and sometimes officers are covering a couple of beats, and sometimes detectives are trying to manage up to 30 active cases on their desk at a time. So that's a challenge for our personnel. So we have to continue to grow with the city, and we have to find ways to attract the best and then retain them.
Thank you for all that you guys are doing. Tomorrow night, again, downtown, you're going to talk about kind of a neighborhood meeting. Where and when, so people can go check it out?
I think it starts at 7 o'clock, and it's at the Library Community Room downtown.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Really appreciate the time.
Glad to be here.
As always. Hey, stay with us when we come back. First of all, I'd love to know your thoughts on the 2015 numbers that Chief Todd just shared with us. And also, when we come back, Jack Seaman made a major announcement today. He's going to be running for U.S. Congress here in North Dakota against, as of right now, at least, Congressman Kevin Kramer. Stay with us. Much more coming up. As always, you can join our conversation. Email us, text us. We'll be right back.